if I slur on my words. I'm a little nervous. Anyway, my name is Sakina, and I'm going to try to convince you that that personal digital media causes lower levels of concentration and focus amongst college level students. And I'm going to tell you a story. I had a professor last quarter, a couple quarters ago. He didn't really allow, he didn't allow electronics to be used in his class at all because they affected how well you paid attention and how well his students paid attention and performed in the classroom, is what he said. He said anytime he walked through the halls and checked anybody else's class and he saw students on their computers, laptops, and phones, he saw that they were on their social media and other things rather than actually taking notes, or from what he saw, taking notes and paying attention to what the teacher was saying. So I'm going to try to convince you guys that electronics in the classroom lowers your level of focus and concentration by first telling you how they affect your academic performance, and second by how they also interfere with your sleep quality, and they'll induce anxiety and depression, which in turn will also affect your academic performance. Okay, now when electronic products are allowed in the classrooms, students will pay less attention to the lecture and more attention to their text messages or their social media. And an article titled, it's called Smartphones Effects on Academic Performance of Higher Level Students, and it was published by the Journal of Multidisciplinary Engineering, Science, and Technology. In the article, there was a study of 100 students in which the majority, I'll say about 65% of those students were in higher learning institutions, and they basically admitted that they used their phones and electronics in the classroom for social media and texting rather than actually paying attention. And what they noticed was that it led to, at the end of the courses, it led to a drop in their GPA. Of those 100 students, about 48% of them reported a drop in their GPA. Well, they reported their GPA dropping to about a 2.5, but the other 22% didn't really notice a change. Their GPA was about a 2.5 to 3.0 still. However, 48% is still a pretty large amount of students for this study of 100 students. And for my second point, which is that the electronics interfere with your sleep quality and induce anxiety and depression, is based on the fact that we have the tendency to, I guess, feel like we have to immediately respond to those messages that we get. And in turn, what happens is, like, kind of, especially if you leave your phone up at night when you sleep, kind of wakes you up a little bit. You feel like you have to respond really quickly. And in an article titled "The Relationship Between Smartphone Use and Severity with Sleep, Depression, and Anxiety in University Students," basically 319 students were divided into 3 groups, and one of those groups was considered, students considered themselves high users of, electronic devices, and 127 of those students said they had difficulty functioning with day-to-day activities because they were so busy, because they felt the need to respond to their messages right away, even in the hours that they would be asleep. And what happened is they became sleep deprived, which then led their anxiety levels to decrease, and then eventually it took on a depressive role. And basically all the anxiety and depression stemmed from, they were sleep deprived, which caused them to perform not as good as they would have in the classroom, which then led them to a drop in, to not perform as well in their academic life, which led to the depression part of it. And that's about it.
Right, well, the propositions identified at the beginning, that did seem like there were a couple of parts to it in the last section, so you want to be careful about that. And then in the first supporting point, you actually started to use that how term that we just talked about avoiding. But by the time you got to the body of the speech, that was no longer a problem. You were, in fact, making declarative points for the secondary claims, so I think you're okay on that. There's a preview, so we know generally where you're headed. You signpost the points in the body of the speech. There's a lot of explanation on each of those points, which I didn't think was that complicated. It took a lot of time, and you probably could have gotten through it a little bit more quickly. The proof that you have on the first point is your professor's personal testimony about things that they saw when they were walking the hallways of the Cal Poly campus, and that seems like it's a little bit thin. Unless they have some specialized ability to see what the students are doing and understand the impact on them in the classroom, I think that's problematic. It's a more generic kind of statement. I think you could find any professor who would say anytime there's a distraction, it is problematic. I think a more general quote would be applicable here, but I didn't find it problematic that you used that. It was fine. What's a little weak is that the only support for it after that is the one study. It's a pretty good study that indicates that a substantial number of people thought that it had an impact on their grades in that one study. But I think you need a little bit more data than that. That's all self-reported. We don't have any long-term studies on this particular issue. This is something that's been going on for a while. I would assume that there's other information available on it. And so it just doesn't feel sufficient in order to be convincing. I think that there is an issue here. I think there's some evidence that points in that direction. Am I convinced that it's always going to be a problem? I'm not quite that convinced, although it's my inclination as an instructor to always feel that way. That's my bias. But that's not, you can't depend on the bias. You got all these people sitting out here, for example, who are watching videos right now in class while we're having this discussion. I'm sure that she feels like she's perfectly engaged in what's going on and has heard everything that I've said. Sorry about that. I do that sometimes when I turn around and notice that. I say, I got to call people out. All right, don't do that. And then the second point, you do have a study that you make reference to. It's a little more vague than the other study was, and that was, I think, a little bit problematic. I think you were apologetic about your presentation. I didn't see anything to be apologetic about. You were quite clear when you were speaking. You got a little stuck on the second point trying to get through that chain of arguments that you've got built in there, and I think you need more evidence for the individual points in the chain. But other than that, the presentation was fine. You want a better exit. You kind of got the Porky Pig exit. Well, I guess that's it. Bah, bah, bah. That, we don't want that. All right, thank you.